Hello everyone, it's me, Cole, the Feezer. I am back with another video, and for this particular video, I'm going to be looking at my top 10 most anticipated games / expansions for 2025. Uh, Unlike last year's list, if you watched that video, this is going to strictly be just games and expansions. It's not going to be more nebulous concepts, if you will. So there is that to look forward to. These are actually things that should hopefully be coming out this year that you can look forward to picking up either online or through your friend and local game store. For me, I think I've got a nice mix of things on this list, but there are also some things that didn't quite make the list. Notably, I'm a playtester. I do a lot of playtesting for Good Games Publishing and other publishers as well. And there are certain things that I know are in the works. I know they're coming. I don't know if they're coming this year. And even if they are coming this year, they haven't been announced yet. So I can't strictly say that, hey, this is what I'm anticipating. There is one title of note that should be coming out this year, but hasn't been publicly announced yet. So I can't say anything. But if I were allowed to speak about it, it would probably be very high on my list. That's just that. And certainly when information does become available for it, I will be sure to post about it on my socials because yeah, that's just what I'm really excited about. But that's immaterial to the video here. I'm going to be rattling off things that have been announced, things that are known, and things that are absolutely coming. So strap in and enjoy my top 10 most anticipated for 2025. So to kick things off, we're going to be taking a look at number 10 on my list, which is also the first expansion on my list. This is an expansion for a base game that I wasn't initially in love with, if you will. I played the base game several times, and it initially didn't click for me. That, like, I'm playing it, I understand what I'm trying to do, but for whatever reason, it's just not quite always coming together for me. That even when I think I'm doing good, my opponents are always doing better, and I could never quite understand what are they doing that I'm missing, like what's not clicking for me. And so that there was that, but I persevered. I played it more and more. I knew there was a good game here, and my friend groups liked it. So it's like, I might as well just try to get better, if you will. And so by playing it more on TTS and Board Game Arena and even physically, eventually I started to get better at it. And I've since won a few rounds of the base game. But then I was introduced to the expansion via TTS, and then later it became available in Board Game Arena. And once I started playing with the expansion, I don't ever see myself playing without this expansion. It's just that good. It takes what feels like a chaotic card-driven tableau builder where you're trying to build a grid of 16 cards, and it takes away some of the chaotic randomness, I would say. That you've got this massive stack of cards, and if you're in need of a particular card and can't find it, well, the expansion goes a long way to help deal with that, I would say. For me, number 10 on my list is the Abundance expansion for Earth, published by Inside Up Games. For me, this expansion just takes what is like a really, really good base game and just takes it to like a 10 out of 10, if not like an 11 out of a 10. It truly is that great of an expansion. I would say to anyone, if you already love the base game, you're going to love the expansion. It's just that good. The main thing that it does for me is it adds the new seed mechanic and the idea that you can get seeds, whether that's through card abilities that get them for you or you're spending 4 sprouts to get a seed. Either way, I love that you can then take those seeds that you now have, and you can, the notable thing you can do is you can cash them in to go digging through the deck to look for a card with a specific property. Like maybe you want a card with a snowy habitat, or a card with a blue ability, or a card with a growth value of 5+ or something, whatever. Basically, any condition that you can score for, you can look for a card that has that condition on it, and I really appreciate that. It makes it so much better. And then even more so, once you get near the end of the game and you're like, oh, this is the final round and I've got all these seeds, what can I do? I love that you can alternatively cash them in and, put out sprouts or put out growth pieces or compost cards from your hand or deck. And it's so good. I've had some truly incredible games that I've really liked. All that being said, though, I understand some of the disingenuousness. It's like, wait, you've already played this. It's like, what exactly are you anticipating here? And I get that. But this is very much a game that is coming out in 2025, even if I've already played it a bunch. But my friend groups that own the game physically don't yet physically own the expansion. And I know many of them haven't played it yet. They haven't gone on to TTS, or they haven't gone on to Board Game Arena and tried out the expansion. But I have. And I know how much they love the base game. They're going to love the expansion even more, especially all the things that it adds. And so I am very much looking forward to the joy that they are going to experience, but also knowing that every time I play it physically now, I'm going to get to play it with that expansion. I very much am looking forward to that. So for me, that's my number 10, the Earth Abundance expansion published by Inside Up Games. And next on my list then is number 9, and coming in at number 9 is the first actual game and not an expansion. This is a game that is by one of my favorite publishers, and if you follow me on social media, that probably narrows it down a lot for you. This is part of this publisher's Ancient Anthology line. If that isn't a dead giveaway, I don't know what is. But when they first introduced this Ancient Anthology line, their first major game was Raiders of Scythia, and I was lukewarm about it only because I already had Raiders of the North Sea and everything that goes with it. And so I wasn't immediately drawn to that, if you will. But then they brought out Hadrian's Wall, and I have played it. I have, up until recently, I didn't own it, but then over the holidays, someone gifted me a copy. And I do look forward to playing it, even if I'm not the best at it, but there is that. And I haven't picked up Legacy of You yet. I'm sure at some point I will. But then I also got Ezra and Nehemiah over the holidays as a gift, and I've been very much enjoying that. So I am slowly coming around on the Ancient Anthology line. But still, I don't know that I'll necessarily pick up Raiders of Scythia because it feels like it's directly competing with Raiders of the North Sea, and I already enjoyed that one a bunch. I don't know that I necessarily need this, but that could change in the future, I suppose. But no, if you're continuing along, then you'll know that one of the next games in the line is Scar Bray, and that is a game that I am very much looking forward to. I recently listened to an episode of the Lens and Veil podcast by Garfield Games. I recently listened to an episode of that, and they were talking all about it, and this just sounds interesting to me, that like your early settlers in the Orkney Islands, and you're basically gathering all these resources, but you're also trying to be mindful of the waste that you produce through the consumption of these resources. And so I appreciate that it's like, you can get all these resources and you can spend them how you like, but you're going to produce waste, and you've got to minimize the waste that you're producing. And so I very much appreciate that aspect of it all. And so it sounds like an interesting twist on the idea of resource production and gathering. And so I am looking forward to it. I can't say I know much more about the gameplay beyond that, per se, but that's only because I tend not to look too deeply into the gameplay until I know I'm ready to actually sit down and play the game. Because I've only got so much room up here, and I can only remember so many games at a given time, and so it's like I don't want to try to commit to memory a game before I'm ready to actually play it, if you will. But it is one that I am still looking forward to, and I'll probably pick up a copy of it when it comes to my friendly local game store. But for me, my number 9 has got to be Scar Bray by Garfield Games. Moving on then, we're going to be looking at number 8 on my list. And for me, this is the next expansion that is on my list, but unlike the previous one, I've actually had the luxury of getting to playtest this expansion. This is an expansion for a tile laying game. I would say it's a pure tile laying game. Unlike Carcassonne, the tiles aren't square, the tiles are hexagonal, and more to the point, there's no additional components. You don't have meeples or tower pieces or dragons or any nonsense like that. You have just the tiles and what is printed on them. For me, my number 8 is the Uncharted expansion for Land vs. Sea, published by Good Games Publishing, due out later this year. What I very much appreciate about this expansion is that it continues to remain just a pure tile laying game, but they've introduced new elements on the tiles to really spice up the gameplay. So as before, where you had the coral and the mountains and the ships and the caravans, and you were building trade routes and coral ranges or mountain ranges. Now you've got things like menhirs, and like you're trying to draw lines between menhirs, and you get points equal to the distance. Or some tiles might have cities on it that can multiply either the bonus points you're getting for a completed feature or doubling the points you get for a trade route. Either way, I appreciate that it adds those elements, and that it also adds more of those special tiles that, like, if you can form a hole, you get to put that special tile in it, but there's more of those now, so you're not limited to just the one, and each of those new special tiles has some element of the expansion on it, so you can really play around with all of that. Those are things that I'm very much looking forward to in the upcoming expansion. I would like to think it'll be out by Gen Con. If not, certainly by the end of the year, I hope. But regardless, for me, that's got to be my number 8, the Uncharted expansion for Land vs. Sea, published by Good Games Publishing. Next on my list is number 7, and it is the next full game on my list. It is a sort of a follow-up or sequel or remastering, if you will, of a game that came out over 10 years ago. I believe it was 2014 this game originally came out. But this takes... that game basically came out in 2014, and at the time it was very popular due to its gameplay and its art style and all of that. But over the years, they've come to realize that it potentially could be better. And they were like, what if we did make it better? How could we make it better? And they even made a huge post on Reddit that got a ton of responses asking how they could make it better. And this is, for me, this was one of the first games that kind of I learned when I was getting into the hobby, if you will. So like there were like the early games like Catan and Carcassonne, but at the time that I learned those, I didn't realize they were a part of this much wider hobby. I thought they were just, as I've said before, I thought they were just random oddities imported from Germany. I didn't think much of them. But this game was one of the first games that I learned getting into the wider hobby, if you will. And I remember originally learning this game, and it felt very much like reading a technical manual. It kind of went over my head. I didn't fully understand what is it asking me to do and how to do it and all this and that. But I've since come to learn that it's a very straightforward game. It's a very easy game, comparatively speaking, to the things that I play now. But I am very much interested in the follow-up to this. I enjoyed the original. So for me, my number 7 is Super Boss Monster by Brotherwise Games. I've always enjoyed the original Boss Monster, and I have pretty much everything there is to have for it at this point. And I'm just looking forward to the upcoming sequel, remaster, if you will, that is Super Boss Monster. I like everything they've done about it because the original Boss Monster and its 2 major expansions had a very NES-inspired theme around them in the box art and in some of the artwork on the cards. And they've continued that idea with Super Boss Monster, making it look like a Super Nintendo game. And so I'm very much looking forward to that, but I'm also looking forward to the big box that should hopefully hold everything that I have up to this point. I don't know everything that they've done to improve the gameplay, but I know they've done a few things to make it feel more gamery, if you will, and So I'm very interested in checking that out. I was pretty much going to be anticipating this anyways, just because I really do like the theme and the art style and all of that. So I have no doubts that the gameplay will absolutely match the rest. So that's what I'm most looking forward to. And so for me, that's got to be my number 7. That's got to be Super Boss Monster, published by Brotherwise Games. Continuing on with my number 6, this is another anticipated release by a publisher that has already been featured on my list. This is another expansion, or should I say expansions, on my list. This, for me, is a set of expansions that I am very much anticipating. They're being released as a group. The crowdfunding campaign should be coming up soon as of the time of filming this video. It has to be the South Tigris expansions published by Garphill Games for all of the South Tigris games. That also includes the Moon Saga, which lets you play everything like a campaign, if you will, back to back to back. I know if you want to argue that I'm cheating a little by putting multiple things into one spot, that's fair. If I had to pick just one of the 3 expansions that are being published, it would probably be the expansion for Inventors of the South Tigris. As mentioned earlier in this video, I recently listened to another episode of the Lens and Veil podcast by Garphill Games, and in this particular episode, they actually talked about the Tides of Trade expansion for Wayfarers of the South Tigris, and I very much appreciate some of the things that they highlighted in that video. I like that in the base game you could place influence on cards, and that would make it more expensive for people to interact with those cards. But now they are potentially replacing that mechanic with a new one that they're basically introducing a 4th guild, and instead of influencing cards, you can influence the 4th guild, and then you can spend influence from that 4th guild to do some rather powerful things, like maybe reclaim a worker or some other effect. One of the other nice things is you're getting some extra space in your starting board, if you will, and so you'll have ways to now upgrade your workers, which seems to me like then they'll be able to do more powerful things when you place them out onto whatever card or spot that you're placing them onto. So those are all things that I very much look forward to. I would say that the upcoming Body of Books expansion for Scholars of the South Tigris is the one that I know the least of, other than that I do know it introduces a 7th track, and though that is a 7th colored track that you can research, a black track that I'd imagine does some powerful but questionable things, if you will, and no matter what, I'm looking forward to it. I love everything that Garphill Games does, but if I had to pick one of the 3, it has to be the Era of Experts expansion for Inventors of the South Tigris as the one that I'm most looking forward to, because the biggest thing that I've seen so far is that they're going to be introducing variable player powers, and that is something I absolutely look forward to. Some of them sound just incredible, that like it just encourages you to do certain things or rewards you for doing those certain things, that it's like, oh, every time you use this craftsperson, like maybe you get a bonus, or every time you research you get a bonus, or here's an extra column in your workshop so you can hold even more tiles that'll allow you to do even more things. And so that's just all things that I'm looking forward to. And of course there's also the Moon Saga, which will give you a way to play all 3 games back to back to back, but they're also adding a solo component to it that would allow you to play all 3 games up to 6 times, that you would play it once with and without the expansion, and that's true for all 3 games. So that's like 6 plays there, and that could be really interesting, and I very much am looking forward to that. So for me, that has to be my number 6. That is the South Tigris expansions published by Garphill Games for all the South Tigris games. Well, we've made it. We are now in the top 5 of my top 10. And coming in at number 5 is a standalone game that is part of a series. It's by a publisher that is noted for doing high-quality productions. I can't think of a single game of theirs that they haven't pushed it to the absolute limits in terms of production quality. This game is part of a series. The first game in the series is one that I very much enjoy. I missed the initial crowdfunding campaign for it, but later, after it had fulfilled and they started running ad after ad after ad on social media, they just kind of invaded my personal space, if you will, to a point that it's like, all right, I can't not see these ads and everyone talking about it. Sure, how do I get a copy? And I did, and I've enjoyed every play of it so far. And then, of course, I had to get the thematic follow up to it, which came out, which I got my copy Octoberish of last year, 2024. For me, my number 5 has to be Brink by Ivy Studios. The first game in the series, Moonrakers, was very much like a deck builder mixed with negotiation, which I thought they did very well. And then the follow-up to that was Moon Rollers, which is a fantastic push your luck dice rolling game. And now the next in the series is Brink, and it's sort of like an origin story, if you will. Like how did the world of Moonrakers come to be, and all of that. And I appreciate that you got a nice blend of, you got worker placement, you've got hexploration, so there's like a bunch of tiles out there and you're going and exploring them. But then you've also got like this hidden voting mechanic that like you can potentially vote on how the game might change, and that all sounds rather interesting. It's like, do you vote what would be best for you, or do you vote what would best suit your personal goals, or would you vote to mess somebody else up? All sounds rather interesting, and from what I gather, it looks as though your workers / ships can potentially be upgraded to do more powerful things. So I'm very keen to see how that plays out. And everything I've seen from their crowdfunding campaign, because I went all in for their Super Deluxe Edition, which just looks incredible. It's got this nice box that's apparently going to have holofoil on it, and a bunch of the tiles will have holofoil on them, and then just like everything's going to be 10 out of 10 in terms of production quality, which is what they always do. If you've ever seen Veiled Fate or Fractured Sky by them, you'll know what I'm talking about. And this also feels the least like everything else that I've put on this list so far. And so for me, that's why it's my number 5 most anticipated of the year. That is Brink by Ivy Studio. Continuing on with my list then, number 4 is a remastering, if you will, of a game that I want to say this would be the 10th year. I'm not quite sure, so don't actually quote me on that, but I think it is. Anyways, this is a remastering of a game that came out that long ago. It's a game that I've very much enjoyed up to this point every time I've played it. It is very much an abstract strategy game, but it is a very beautiful abstract strategy game. It doesn't need to look this good. It could have just been wooden blocks that, as the designer originally created, but a certain publisher saw this game, played it, loved it, and they were like, we could make something out of this, and they ran with it, and they've made it absolutely beautiful. But if you had just what is out there now, you might think that's how much better can it get, and oh boy, the publisher has found a way to make it even better. And so for me, my number 4 has to be the Santorini Pantheon edition. Specifically, I'm getting the Pantheon Collector's Edition, which is just amazing. So the edition I'm getting is going to have really nice synthetic cards, which are the same style of cards featured in the deluxe edition of Radlands, which it's one of the few games where I've never felt the need to sleeve the cards, which is really saying something. It's going to have nice acrylic tokens for all the cardboard bits that would otherwise be needed, and it's going to have this incredible Lazy Susan of a turntable that you can use to rotate the board around so you can see all the action from every angle and don't have to constantly standing up and looking down over the board, if you will. But yeah, they're doing a lot to really remaster this. Like, they're taking all the buildings and making them even better as if they weren't good enough already. They're improving the miniatures for the workers, if you will, making those even better. And then the previous edition, all the rules for all the gods and heroes were just jammed into the rule book. And so you had this big, like 4 or 6 page rule book, and now they're like, yeah, we can condense that down by putting the rules for every god and hero on the back of the card. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. So it's really going to go a long way towards reducing the size of the rule book, but also making it easier to then figure out what does this particular character do, because you'll deal them out and you're like, what does that do? Let's just flip it over and find out. You don't have to go combing through a giant rule book to find each one to know what it does. So I very much appreciate all of that. And like I said, I've always enjoyed the game, and I know I'm going to continue enjoying the game once this collector's edition comes out, which should be very soon as of the time of recording this, which is why I've been trying to get this video out, because it would be hard to anticipate something once I've already gotten it, if you will. So, and I also should add that they're even adding a ton more gods and a ton more heroes, so you're going to have even more matchups to play with. And I also appreciate that they, over the years, balanced everything that's already been out there, which, yeah, they've kind of done that, and if you knew where to look, you could find some of those balances, but they never did like a fully updated rulebook with all of the new balance tweaks, if you will. But this new edition should have all of that in order, and that is just the amount of replayability that this will have. I am very much looking forward to it. That has to be my number 4, Santorini Pantheon edition, published by Roxley Games. We're getting near the end now. We are in top 3 territory, and so looking at my number 3, then this is a game by another one of my favorite publishers. This is a rather interesting game, if you will. It's what's known as an evolving card game that, if you've ever played Magic the Gathering, that has like a whole narrative behind it, like with all the Phyrexia and the Planeswalkers, and I don't know anything about all of it, but I know that there is some narrative there, and like there is a story being told in the background, and some of that can be seen in some of the cards apparently as you play them. But yeah, this is in a similar vein, if you will, that they're going to release a core set to start, and it'll have a whole lot of narrative behind it. And then once the game is out there and people start playing it, they're going to absorb that narrative, and then select individuals who get to be a part of what they're calling a council, and they'll then get to vote on how that narrative evolves. Like maybe 2 factions will go to war, or maybe 2 factions will partner up to help better themselves, or maybe 1 faction is wiped out, or maybe a new faction comes in, or whatever the case may be. And so that's a very intriguing idea of how that could all play out in reality. I would say gameplay-wise, this is a game that feels not unlike Res Arcana, in the sense that you are given or drafting a very limited set of cards. You're going to have what I believe is a hand of 7 plus a leader, and so you're just going to, turn by turn, you're going to be playing one of those cards and trying to build up some crazy combos to either wipe out your opponents or hit a certain point total, or whatever the case may be. But all that said, my number 3 has to be Etherstone by Thundergriff Games. It is a game that was on my list last year. I was anticipating just learning more about it, and since the crowdfunding campaign started, I've very much been intrigued by it. I am naturally all in with it, as I am all in with all things that Thundergriff Games does. But yeah, I'm very much, everything I'm seeing about this looks incredible. The artwork is like on a whole nother level, which it quite frankly has to be if they're going to do a ton of world building with it. They're also releasing a whole like book, if you will, that spells out a lot of the narrative elements, which is really cool. But I think one of the most surprising things is the fact that this is the next Simone Luciani game, which, looking at some of the other things he's done, this feels very unlike everything else, and that's kind of interesting. So I'm curious to see how all of this really plays out in reality. To be clear, I don't play Magic the Gathering. I've never really been interested, because I just know that it's a huge money sink, if you will, to get decks and build good decks and all of that. It just takes a lot of money and commitment, and that's not something I'm strictly interested in per se. So I've always been kind of intrigued by what I would say are Magic adjacent games. It's why when I picked up Radlands, I kind of immediately fell in love with it, and it's since become one of my most played games of all time. And it's kind of why I look forward to this. I've liked other similar games. Like I said, I've liked Res Arcana. Carnival of Monsters is a hidden gem I would say that I've enjoyed. Just things like that that really stand out to me, and I'm very much looking forward to what this potentially has to bring to the table. So it's very interesting to see how that's all going to play out, especially with Simone Luciani as the designer. But for me, I have to say that my number 3 is Etherstone by Thunderdrift Games. Continuing on, we're on to the top 2 now, and we're taking a look at my number 2. This is the last expansion on my list. It is by a publisher that was previously mentioned. It is an expansion for a game that I rated as my number 1 game of 2023. And quite frankly, if I was to ever do a top 10, the base game would probably be in my top 10. I just find it to be that good. Furthermore, this expansion is actually by a designer that I previously mentioned in this video, so that's a double crossover there, if you will. But no, for me, my number 2 has to be the Oceania expansion for Darwin's Journey, published by Thunderdrift Games. I love Darwin's Journey. I've not been shy about that. I've done, like I said, it's my top game of 2023. I've done, I think, 2 videos on the game. I've talked about the Fireland expansion, which I very much enjoy, and I know I'm not alone in that. I've played the base game. I've enjoyed it every time, but the first time I played the Fireland expansion, it was just like on a whole nother level for me. It just was like, wow, this is incredible. And seeing everything that the Fireland expansion could do to transform the base game, it's had me incredibly intrigued now with how the Oceania expansion might also transform the base game. I appreciated in the Fireland expansion that like you were going on these adventures, and to go on these adventures it would take time, but taking that time came at a risk that you would have to suffer penalties, and those penalties could eventually lead to negative points at the end of the game. And so you had to find this fine balance of you want to go on enough adventures, but you want to find a way to make up for the time that you spent going on them, so you're not losing a ton of points at the end. And you can't, the answer isn't to just not go on adventures, because you also lose points by not going on adventures, so you're having to really just find a way to balance all that out. And it's just really interesting to see all the kind of crazy combos you can build by actually going on those adventures. So I am very much looking forward to what Oceania brings to the table. It's going to be a whole new map and a main board. You're also going to have new player boards, because now you're going to have a whole new set of 16 species that you can research instead of the ones that are in the base game. And that's going to come with all new special actions and all kinds of crazy things. Like, I think I saw that there's going to be like special actions on the map itself that, like, once you pass certain thresholds, you might have the option to claim a special action. So now that might unlock new spaces that you, and I would imagine others, can go to then to get powerful abilities or effects. And I've also seen where you can potentially put out special tents, or like pay a special cost to like unlock special things while traversing the map. Like, they feel like supercharged 10 spaces. Like, I know one of them gets you like a special worker that has like 6 wild seals and silver and gold distinction, similar to the Darwin mini expansion. So it could lead to some crazy combinations there. I also know that there are going to be hazards that you'll have to deal with. So there'll be certain banners you cross over, and it's like there might be spiders or other hazards that you'll have to certainly contend with. And that kind of makes sense if they're theming it after the Oceania region. I mean, Australia is known as one of the most hazardous landscapes you can traverse. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of all of that. That is currently crowdfunding on Kickstarter, and it's doing quite well. But their goal is to release by the end of this year, and I am very much hopeful for that. So yeah, you can be rest assured that when that does come, I am going to be talking about it, probably doing a video about it, the whole works. So for me, my number 2 on this list has to be the Oceania expansion by Thunderdrift Games. We're here. We're at the end. We are at my number 1 most anticipated of 2025. for me, this is by a publisher that I can't think of anything else they've done. This is the only thing that I know them for. This is a game that came out, well, 2 years ago, I want to say, 2 or 3 years ago. I know that this is like a second edition of that game, the thing that's on my list. I know that the original cover art for the first edition actually was voted by the Dice Tower audience as the best cover of, I want to say, 2023. This is a game that feels most unlike anything else that I have on this list, game in terms of gameplay and mechanics. For me, my number one has to be Ice Unlimited or Ice Second Edition, published by This Way. So thematically, this is just really interesting that it's like you're exploring an Arctic landscape and you're having to dig down through an ice wall or an ice shield, if you will, and as you're digging down, you're discovering artifacts and things like that, or relics, if you will. But not all those things might just be random objects. They could potentially be pieces of ancient technology that have since long been abandoned or forgotten about or left behind from an old civilization. And I appreciate everything that's going on here, that it has like this nice mechanic that you have this multi-layered board of tiles and you're having to physically dig down through, so you're removing layers of tiles and exposing what's underneath. And I like that you're your own like expedition crew trying to do all of this, as is every other player, but at certain times you might have to work together to try and get through some of the more difficult sections of ice, which could be interesting. I know that there might be like wildlife or monsters that you have to deal with. I know that as you're digging down through the ice and finding some of those relics, it can really help boost your engine and everything that you're trying to do. I know that there are, of course, variable player power, so each expedition team is going to have its own ability that it can take advantage of. But just between the artwork and the way that the board comes together during setup and just the way that everything looks, especially the fancy deluxe that they've done through crowdfunding, I am very much looking forward to it. And of course, the cover art for the first edition was incredible, and they continue that wonderful artwork all throughout. And yeah, I don't know a ton about this because I haven't looked too deeply into it, but I just know that I am super looking forward to it because, like I said, it feels very much unlike any of the other things that I have on my list, and that is always something that very much intrigues me. If you can tell me this is something unlike anything I've played, that really grabs my attention, if you will, and this is certainly doing that. And so, yeah, for me, I think the number one most anticipated game of 2025 for me has to be Ice Unlimited, or Ice Second Edition, if you will, as published by This Way. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. That, again, was my top 10 most anticipated games and expansions for 2025. I'd love to know what you thought. Did you agree with any of my picks? Are you anticipating any of the same things that I am? Is there anything not on my list that you're anticipating? Let me know in the comments below. While you're at it, feel free to give me a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all the standard things. Feel free to also follow me on social media. I post regularly on Instagram. That being said, that's going to do it for today. Bye.